Flair is talking about a part of his life most fans know nothing about, how decades of so-called social drinking ended.
Flair is talking about a part of his life most fans know nothing about, how decades of so-called social drinking ended with a health scare last summer that he says nearly killed him. Ric Flair has always been larger than life. The Nature Boy walked into arenas with unmatched confidence, survived battles inside and outside the ring, and became a symbol of resilience for millions of fans. But even legends face moments that no amount of fame or bravado can protect them from. In recent years, silence replaced the showmanship, and questions began to rise. What was happening behind the curtain? What was Ric Flair hiding from the world? When he finally broke his silence, the truth left fans shaken in a way they never expected. The man who refused to quit. Ric Flair's legendary journey. Ric Flair's journey began in 1972 when a young Richard Morgan Fear, after training under Vera Ga, entered the wrestling ring for the first time. Nobody knew then that this rookie would go on to shape wrestling history. With platinum blonde hair, extravagant robes that shimmered under the lights, and his booming woo-choing through arenas, Flair didn't just wrestle. He performed. He built a character so flamboyant and magnetic that people could not take their eyes off him. His charisma was unmatched, and it made him a star. Ric Flair's wrestling ability was what truly set him apart from others in the business. He wasn't just a showman on the microphone. He was a master technician in the ring. Flair understood how to control the pace of a match, make every move matter, and keep fans guessing about what would happen next. He was especially known for his use of the figure 4 leg lock, a submission hold that targeted an opponent's legs. It wasn't just painful, it created suspense. When Flair applied it, fans leaned forward, waiting to see if his opponent would resist or finally tap out. Over the course of his decades-long career, Flair won 16 officially recognized world championships, competing in major promotions like the NWA, National Wrestling Alliance, WCW, World Championship Wrestling, and WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment. That title count and the consistent quality of his matches helped cement his reputation as one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time. That greatness came with scars. In 1975, Flair's career nearly ended in tragedy when a plane crash in North Carolina left him with a broken back in 3 places. Doctors told him his career was over before it had even reached its peak. But Flair never accepted that. Within just 8 months, he was back in the ring, proving to himself and the world that limits could be broken. That comeback alone carved his place in wrestling lore as someone who simply did not quit. How many athletes would risk everything just to keep doing what they loved? Even as time caught up with him, Flair stayed in the ring long after most of his peers had retired. He delivered a tearful farewell at WrestleMania 24 in 2008 in a match with Shawn Michaels that is still remembered as one of the sport's most emotional moments. And yet, years later in 2022, he laced up his boots again for one last contest at the staggering age of 73. It showed a man who could not walk away from the spotlight, or maybe from the part of himself that only existed inside the ropes. Outside the ring, his battles were even harder. In 2013, Flair's youngest son, Reed, died of a heroin overdose. It was a wound that never healed, and Flair himself admitted the grief stayed with him always. His legendary resilience in the ring could not protect him from heartbreak at home. All of this built the image of Ric Flair as more than a wrestler. He became a symbol of survival. A man who always came back no matter what. That is why his later health struggles hit fans with such weight. If even Ric Flair could be knocked down in ways he could not rise from, what did that mean for the rest of us? The first health scare. In August 2017, the cheers of the arena were replaced with the beeping of hospital monitors when Ric Flair was rushed to emergency care. He had been suffering from severe abdominal pain and nausea, symptoms that escalated quickly into something far more dangerous. Doctors diagnosed him with a bowel obstruction, a condition where part of the intestine becomes blocked. In Flair's case, the obstruction triggered a catastrophic chain reaction inside his body. One organ after another began to shut down. His kidneys went into acute failure, forcing doctors to put him on dialysis. His liver, weakened by decades of heavy drinking, struggled to function. His intestines were so compromised that surgeons had to remove part of his bowel to prevent further infection. His heart became unstable when sepsis set in. And, during this fragile state, a pacemaker was surgically implanted to help regulate his rhythm. This was not a single health crisis. It was multiple battles happening inside his body at the same time. The situation was so dire that doctors placed Flair in a medically induced coma. He remained in that state for more than 10 days as his body fought to stabilize. Survival odds were grim. Medical staff told his family he had only a 20% chance of making it through. In a haunting admission later, Flair himself said, I had kidney failure. I had heart failure. I had everything you can imagine. The emergency surgery and round-the-clock treatment eventually pulled him back, but recovery was brutal. Flair spent over 30 days in intensive care, his weight dropping from 220 lb to 206. Theman, once known for his limitless energy, now needed physical therapy just to walk again because of severe muscle atrophy. His body, conditioned for decades to take punishment in the ring, had been broken in ways fans had never seen before. The cause, Flair openly admitted, was no mystery. He had been drinking heavily for most of his career. By his own account, alcohol abuse had worn down his body until it could no longer endure. "I didn't think I was going to make it. I was given last rites," he said, a startling confession that showed how close he had come to never leaving the hospital. Wrestling with mortality. When Ric Flair emerged from the hospital in 2017, he was not the same man who had strutted in sequined robes and shouted about being the limousine-riding, jet-flying icon of wrestling. He had faced something even he could not outtalk, the possibility of death. In his own words, he admitted, "I'll never drink again. I can't." Many fans questioned whether sobriety would hold after decades of excess, but Flair continued to say in interviews that he had left alcohol behind. His recovery was not only physical. Mentally, the ordeal had left scars that no amount of surgery could heal. Flair began speaking openly about depression and post-traumatic stress. For a man who once embodied overconfidence, admitting fear was as-shocking as any of his matches. He confessed that what frightened him most was not death itself, but the thought of missing milestones in his grandchildren's lives. The image of Ric Flair as untouchable had been replaced with something far more human. Wendy Barlow, his partner, later revealed that she stayed by his hospital bed every night during the coma, sleeping in a chair for 40 consecutive nights. Her devotion became part of the story, showing fans that the Nature Boy's survival was as much about love and support as it was about medical care. That detail alone made people see Flair differently. For decades, he was portrayed as the man who needed no one. Yet here he was alive because someone refused to leave his side. After that ordeal, Flair's outlook shifted. He reportedly began reflecting more on legacy than spotlight. In one interview, he described himself as lucky to still be here. Words that would have sounded impossible during his prime when he bragged about wealth and winning. He also leaned into family, particularly his daughter, Charlotte Flair, who by then was already one of WWE's biggest stars. Flair acknowledged past failures as a father and tried to make peace by mentoring her and other young wrestlers. To fans, this was another side of Ric Flair they had never seen. Humble, reflective, even tearful. It was clear that the Nature Boy had begun wrestling with something bigger than any opponent in the ring. But even as his spirit was changing, his body was preparing to remind him that the fight was not yet over. Rumors, whispers, and public concern. After Ric Flair's near-death experience in 2017, fans were desperate to believe that the Nature Boy had cheated death for the last time and would continue history of resilience. But as the months turned into years, public appearances told a different story. At first, the changes were subtle, easy to dismiss as the natural effects of age. Soon, though, they became impossible to ignore. At a 2018 Comic-Con appearance, fans who had waited hours to meet him left with a sense of unease. Some claimed to notice that Flair's hands trembled while signing autographs, and his speech seemed slower, at times slurred. For Aman, once known for explosive energy and booming promos, this was a startling contrast. Some asked quietly among themselves, was this the toll of his past lifestyle, or was something new developing? By 2020, during WrestleMania weekend, Flair canceled his scheduled appearance at the last minute. WWE explained it as health concerns, without offering details. That vagueness fueled speculation. Wrestling outlets began digging for answers, but nothing concrete emerged. Fans could only guess, and guesses often carried the darkest possibilities. The physical signs were becoming impossible to ignore. Flair's frame, once full of charisma and bravado, now looked with something bigger than any opponent in the ring. But even as his spirit was changing, his body was preparing to remind him that the fight was not yet over. Rumors, whispers, and public concern. After Ric Flair's near-death experience in 2017, fans were desperate to believe that the Nature Boy had cheated death for the last time and would continue history of resilience. But as the months turned into years, public appearances told a different story. At first, the changes were subtle, easy to dismiss as the natural effects of age. Soon, though, they became impossible to ignore. At a 2018 Comic-Con appearance, fans who had waited hours to meet him left with a sense of unease. Some claimed to notice that Flair's hands trembled while signing autographs, and his speech seemed slower, at times slurred. For Amon, once known for explosive energy and booming promos, this was a startling contrast. Some asked quietly among themselves, was this the toll of his past lifestyle, or was something new developing? By 2020, during WrestleMania weekend, Flair canceled his scheduled appearance at the last minute. WE explained it as health concerns without offering details. That vagueness fueled speculation. Wrestling outlets began digging for answers, but nothing concrete emerged. Fans could only guess, and guesses often carried the darkest possibilities. The physical signs were becoming impossible to ignore. Flair's frame, once full of charisma and bravado, now looked noticeably gaunt. At public appearances, he often leaned on a cane for support, and his face appeared thinner, almost hollow. During WWE's Legends Night special on January 4, 2021, fans saw these changes up close. Flair appeared on screen in a backstage segment with Charlotte Flair and Lacey Evans, part of an ongoing storyline. But instead of nostalgia, the reaction online was filled with concern. Social media lit up with worried comments with viewers, calling him frail, shrunken, and even confused in his delivery. For lifelong fans who had idolized him as the untouchable nature boy, seeing him in such fragile condition was painful. Behind the scenes, colleagues hinted that Flair was keeping details of his condition to himself. They described him as private, but their tone suggested more. It left fans to wonder, was Ric protecting his legacy by hiding the full truth? Or was he simply not ready to admit what was happening to his body? Industry outlets began floating possibilities. Some pointed to long-term organ damage given his decades of drinking. Others speculated about complications with his pacemaker. None of it was confirmed, but the rumors gained traction because every new appearance seemed to support them. Unverified claims even circulated that Flair was receiving treatment quietly, perhaps for liver problems or related conditions. Fans debated these reports online, torn between hope and fear. Their question lingered in the background. How much longer could Ric Flair keep fighting battles his body clearly did not want to fight? The cancer diagnosis. In early 2021, Ric Flair faced a health scare that many fans never even knew was happening. Away from the spotlight, doctors discovered a growth on his lower back. At first, it was assumed to be harmless. But when further testing was done, it came back with the word no one ever wants to hear: cancer. Specifically, Flair was diagnosed with basal C-cell carcinoma, a form of skin cancer that develops on areas of the body exposed to years of sunlight. Flair did not rush to make this public. Instead, he tried to keep it quiet, perhaps hoping the issue would pass without the world knowing. News channels later confirmed that Flair had undergone a minor outpatient procedure in Atlanta to remove the cancerous growth. Cryotherapy and topical chemotherapy were also used as preventive measures, treatments aimed at killing any cells that might try to grow back. When he did finally speak on the matter, Flair tried to downplay it. He brushed it off in interviews, calling it just a little sunspot and insisting it was nothing he could not handle. On the surface, it sounded like classic nature boy bravado, but privately, reports claimed he was shaken. Flair had already been through near-death experiences. Adding cancer into the mix was something he did not want to dwell on publicly. His history only made the diagnosis more concerning. Years of tanning lights and sun exposure increased his risk of recurrence. Friends close to him worried more than he was letting on. Hulk Hogan, one of his longtime rivals and closest peers, reportedly urged him to take the diagnosis more seriously. According to whispers in wrestling circles, Hogan warned him that what seemed small now could easily come back in a more dangerous form. For much of 2021, fans are unaware anything had happened. Flair still posted on social media, still appeared at events, still played the part of the unshakable legend. Only later in the year did he begin to mention the cancer scare. Even then, his tone suggested a man trying to reassure others, perhaps even himself, that it was nothing to be concerned about. Looking back, one has to wonder, was Flair's silence an act of courage, or was it denial? Did he truly believe it was just a minor issue? Or did he fear what might happen if he admitted the full weight of the diagnosis? The scare eventually faded from headlines, but what made the moment sound settling was not the diagnosis itself. It was the quiet that followed. Silence, struggle, and growing speculation. Between 2022 and early 2025, Ric Flair's presence in public life shifted from constant energy to near silence. The man who once lived under bright lights and in front of cameras began withdrawing in ways that fans could not ignore. In wrestling, absence often speaks louder than words. And for Flair, the silence became deafening. Flair reportedly skipped appearances at multiple reunions where he had been expected to appear. He also canceled several scheduled signings and fan expos, events that had always been reliable spaces for him to connect with his devoted audience. Each missed appearance led to more questions than answers. Was it fatigue?